Today I want to talk about types of wood. In our last PowerPoint, we talked about softwoods and hardwoods and what trees they came from. Today we're going to get more specific. The first type of wood is cherry. This is one of my favorite types of wood because I like the way that it looks when it's finished. When you're looking at wood, so you go out into the shop and you want to try to identify what piece of wood you have, there are two main things to look at. One is its color. Cherry has a reddish color. The other is the grain pattern. What I'm talking about with grain pattern are these lines in the wood. This happens from when the tree is growing. So in the spring, it rains more, so the tree grows more. It's called springwood, and it's the stuff in this area. There's a lot more of it, and it's less dense because the tree's growing fast. In the summer, you'll get these dark lines. It doesn't rain as much, the tree doesn't grow as much, so the wood is more dense, thus creating it to be darker. So cherry has a nice grain pattern and it has a red color. Those two things are what you want to look at when you are determining what kind of wood you have. Maple is another hardwood. It has a grain pattern that's similar to cherry, but you can tell it's different because it's color. It's a lot lighter of a color. So the cutting board that I showed you had maple. Oak. When you think of any furniture, so cabinets or coffee tables or even the desks here at school, you probably are seeing oak. Oak has a very pronounced grain pattern. You can see these little lines in here that my arrow is pointing to. These are called rays, and this is the passages for the food when the tree's growing. This is very pronounced in oak. There are a couple different kinds of oak. There's red oak and white oak. What we have here is red oak. It's not as red as cherry. It's a little bit lighter of a red, but it still has a red tint. White oak would be more white. Pine is a softwood. You can kind of get confused with pine and maple because they're both lighter in color, although pine is more yellow. And the summerwood is darker than it is on maple. Also, if you were to hold a piece of pine and hold a piece of maple, you would notice that the pine is a lot lighter because it's less dense. It's not as heavy. Pine also has a lot more knots. Fun fact, knots are created from the branches in trees. So pine, if you think of like a Christmas tree or an evergreen, pine, they have a lot of branches. That's why you see a lot more knots in pine. Pine is typically used in construction. So if you think of like a 2x4 for building a house, that's pine. We usually don't use softwoods for building because it's a lot harder to machine. We typically use hardwoods for making furniture so that it lasts longer. Now, in our shop, you might be tricked because we have plywood that has cherry on what's called its veneer. The outer layer on both sides might be cherry or maple or walnut. But if you look on the inside, there's these different layers of a cheaper wood. And what they do is they orient the grain cross at a 90-degree angle so that it's stronger. But we have this out there because if I were going to make like a bookshelf or a desk like we do in carpentry or higher up classes here, then I would want to use plywood because then I don't have to put together a whole bunch of solid wood, and it's a lot easier to work with and cheaper. So when you're here making your cutting board, make sure you look out for that. Poplar. Poplar is a hardwood, but it's not very good to look at. So you wouldn't want to use it for things that you would see. We keep it here because we use it for the inside of projects like our tool cabinet. Our tool cabinet has poplar in the drawers. So we needed a nice hardwood drawer, but we didn't want to use an expensive wood, so we used poplar. It doesn't really do it justice, but you'll really always be able to tell because this inside part here is like an ugly green. Black walnut is a favorite of students for their cutting boards because it's a real dark brown. It's got a real nice grain pattern, as you can see from the picture. But the one drawback is that black walnut is the most expensive wood we have. Now, with that being said, your cutting board is not going to be that expensive anyway, but the cutting board that I showed you has maple as the light colored wood and black walnut as the dark colored wood. You get a real nice contrast between the two. And this last one is just some websites you could check out if you wanted to know more about this.